what is hopefully many recordings on Plato, especially Plato's Republic. I want to work through the Republic in a very kind of thorough manner. One of the difficulties of reading any major work, especially the great works of philosophy, is you want to dive in deep to get into the details. But once you do that, once you sort of dive into a text and you really, get into the heart of it, it's often easy to lose sight of the big picture, what you could call the so what of the text. And one of the things that a real thorough reading of a text can do is it can give you a type of understanding of the precise details of this or that argument in particular parts of the work. But it can also have the unintended consequences of causing you to lose sight of what you can call the overarching argument or the broad narrative. And it's easy to think that you understand what a text is because you understand the details of it. But if you don't keep in mind the broader context, the broader narrative or argument of the text, then the details don't really make any sense. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing as we read through Plato's Republic especially is we're going to be kind of bouncing back and forth between looking at the details of particular aspects or parts of the book, arguments Socrates is making, various interlocutors that he has in this work that they're making. But then we're going to also then always be referring back to what I will lay out in a later episode, the main themes, the main concepts, ideas that I think are being recapitulated or re-examined over and over throughout the text. And so if you fail to be able to jump back and forth between the details and the picture, or what you can call the parts and the whole, you lose sight of everything. So just as a microscope is very useful for helping you to understand something, just focusing on the microscopic details of something can cause you to forget what really it is that you're looking at. Right? So you might get the impression that because we know the cellular structure or whatever is going on deep down at the microscopic level, then we really know what we're talking about, what we're looking at. But if you can't kind of bounce back and forth between, but these are cells of a human being, or these are cells of a dog, which is the dog that I've had for years and years and years. If you can't keep both those in mind, the grand and the microscopic, the macroscopic, the microscopic, the little, the big, the part and the whole, then you will only get part of the picture, or an incomplete picture. And an incomplete picture is useful, but it's also dangerous, because you can draw various conclusions from an incomplete picture, which are false, right? So those conclusions could be false, bad assumptions, because you take the part of the picture to be the whole of the picture, right? So this, I think, is one of the tendencies of what you could think of as like an atomism, or something along those lines in the sciences, where you have the emphasis, the study on the parts get overemphasized, and therefore they blind you to the whole of which they are parts, which then causes you to even forget that these are parts of something, and therefore you just eliminate or get rid of whatever these are parts of. And so then you actually don't understand what you're really even looking at. If you take, the microscopic to be the fundamental reality, then you actually forget that this is the microscopic view of something, right? Of a dog, of a human, and so you have this forgetfulness that you get of the broader picture by a focus on the narrow picture. And so I want to kind of lead you right here at the beginning to think about that, to reflect on that as we read Plato's Republic, because I think one of the things that can happen is you can read a text and you can think, this is really boring. Why do people say this is such an exciting, important text? It just seems so overly complicated and things. Now, there is a lot of complications going on, but it's not a boring text. And in fact, the reason it's not a boring text comes out if you read it kind of quickly. And that's because you don't get bogged down by the details. If certain parts of what someone says don't make sense to you, you just keep going. And you can still track the conversation, the bigger conversation, even if you don't fully get the details. And it can still be a very interesting conversation, even if you don't understand every bit and piece that's being said. We do this in our everyday life. So like when you're listening to friends talk about, I don't know, maybe it's your favorite sports team, or maybe it's not even a sport that you really, so much enjoy or know a whole lot about, especially say at like the professional level. You don't know the players and anything like that. You don't know the records of the teams, but you can still follow the conversation and find the conversation to be pretty interesting by just like listening to it, even if you don't know the details. And then if you were to just stop and think, overly, just be overly careful about, oh wait, I can't follow the conversation because I don't know who this person is. You have to stop and try to look up who that person is. You'll kind of lose the conversation and you'll just kind of get lost. So it's amazing how we can follow stories, we can follow conversations, even though we don't know the details, and they can still be very interesting when you don't know the details. And so I advise you to not lose hope if at any point the Republic kind of seems like, I don't really get this doesn't really make sense. That's fine. Keep plugging away, keep pressing on, because like most things, they make sense after the fact or down the road. So when you finish something, you can then reflect back on what has happened and say, now I see why that person said this or why that person did this. I didn't get it at the time, but now I do, because I'm at the end, or this other thing down the road kind of clarified a lot that came before. And so then the whole picture gets, illuminated because of that special, aha moment. So I would recommend that you keep your spirits up, keep pressing through the reading of Plato, because it does pay off, but it's sort of different for each person when that's the case. Some people are sucked into Plato right at the very beginning. Some people it's after a couple pages. Some people don't really catch on to really what's going on in the conversation until much later. Sometimes it's at the very end, and that's just different. Sometimes it's different temperaments. Some people focus on certain aspects, and that's what kind of gets in the way or blocks them from really being able to comprehend what's happening. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just kind of different ways people learn, different ways people listen or read. Just as some people can follow conversations easier than other people, but the thing that's necessary is that if you're going to understand a conversation, and reading a book is like a conversation, especially the Republic, since it's literally a dialogue, the way you understand a conversation is by sticking with it. It's like if you were to be standing in a store and then all of a sudden you overhear this conversation. Your first minute, you're like, what the heck are they talking about? I don't get what they're talking about. And as you listen, the more you listen, you realize, oh, this person's pool is leaking and they're talking about how to fix this, but they're talking about this type of material that I don't know what it is. And the more you listen, you might realize, oh, it's probably some sort of like cement that they're thinking about using. So the more that you stay with the conversation, the more it'll clarify itself. And so a philosophical spirit is one who is willing to stay with the conversation, to stay there, and to kind of be patient, to let it kind of reveal and speak to you, and not think that you have to get the answers right up front as quick as possible. It's one of the dangers of kind of the world that I think we live in, is that we have this expectation that if we don't understand something, the answer should be as readily available as possible. And it's a really unhelpful thing, because what it's saying is, when you don't understand something, the problem is on the other thing's terms. So like if someone speaks and says something to you and you don't understand what they're saying, your initial impression, or at least my initial impression, a lot of us, is, oh, the problem is on their end. They need to clarify themselves. They're the ones that, are in the wrong. They need to, speak more clearly, say more things. I can't figure this out. Whereas in reality, that may be the case, but it's just as much perhaps the case that the mistake lies in you. Maybe it's the case that you're not, well disposed to understand what they're saying or to think about what they're saying. And so there's kind of a burden or an expectation that the reader of a text or the listener of a conversation has. They have to have a type of patience to listen, or to read with kind of an open ear, and not to think that all the answers should just come right when I want them, because maybe it's the case that I need to kind of reorient myself, reconceive of the situation if I'm going to understand it. So maybe the issue is in how I've conceived of things, not in the things themselves. And so that's something that I think philosophy is trying to do. It's trying to get the reader or the participant in a conversation to slow down and to realize they need to restructure or reorder themselves if they're going to understand. And that's basically what wisdom is. It's this willingness to like hand yourself over to the truth, even if that means you have to correct or revise your own understandings of what it is to think, what it is to know. So I ask you to have that patience as you proceed. Okay. Some of the things I had just mentioned in talking about the potential pitfalls of getting into the details of a text and losing sight of the whole narrative or the whole story is actually, I did that on purpose, because there's something of a fascinating irony, you could call it, in that very idea of focus on the part, losing sight of the whole, is the whole. Let's call it the whole drama of the Republic. So what the Republic is about is it's about the relationship of parts to wholes. And you think that doesn't make much sense. I'll give you some examples, sort of working to what I think is the primary example of the Republic. So we've already talked about like cells are parts of an organism, a human, say. So to understand what cells are, you need to understand them as parts of an organism. So like you can actually go up a couple levels to understand what a heart is or lungs are. A lung or a heart or a hand, these things only make sense in relation to, an animal. So the concept of a heart necessarily implies that it's a heart of some type of living thing. A hand necessarily implies that it's, of some type of thing. That's right. That's a handed living creature. Same thing with lungs. And so the idea is that parts always find their intelligibility, meaning parts, like organs, always find or always make sense or are always explained in relation to a broader whole, right? And this makes sense with organs. You can't explain what a lung is unless you appeal to this system of circulation of blood. And well, the circulation of blood occurs where? Well, within some type of organism. And so a heart is always going to be something in relation to this broader organism. Okay, and that's an easy example that hopefully we can all understand. That to understand the part of one thing, you understand the whole of it. Here's another example. A letter, so like the letter P, is a letter that doesn't really have a meaning. It doesn't really mean anything. But letters can become meaningful, or they can become intelligible, but that's only when they're kind of put into a whole, which we call a word. So you take a bunch of letters which don't really mean anything. P, the letter R, the letter A, the letter Y, the letter E, and the letter R. I just picked a random word on the very first paragraph of the Republic. Right, just a couple lines down, they refer to prayer, right? So each of those letters taken individually, the letter P doesn't mean anything, the letter R doesn't mean anything, but then when you relate them all to each other in a particular way, you order them all in a particular way, and you put Prayer, and you put them all together, somehow you get this thing that we call a word, which is this whole, which has a meaning, right? The word prayer has a meaning, even if it's the case that the individual letters taken individually or on their own don't have a meaning. And so you can think of it like, if you were to focus on the parts, that is, if you were to focus on letters without a word, then you'll kind of lose the meaning. You only get the meaning when you find the parts all related to each other, ordered to each other, and made into a whole. Going back to the organism with the organs, all the organs only make sense. They only are organs when they're related to each other and they're parts of a whole, organic system. Biologists can probably talk about how all these different systems of organisms relate, so that it leads to the life of the organism, right? So you have to have the circulatory system and the nervous system, and all these different biological systems all have to be like interacting in the right way. They all have to be related in the right way in order for you to live. Once the circulatory system stops working, that's going to like affect all these other parts of the organism, and the whole thing's just going to kind of break apart. Just as if you were to take out one of the letters of a word, the word no longer makes any sense. It's not that same word anymore, and it kind of breaks apart, you might say, or it kind of dies once you take one of the parts out. Likewise, if you take one of the crucial parts of an organism out, it too dies. And so what Plato is trying to think about is many of the things that we that we encounter, that we think about, are things that are wholes that have parts. And what he's wanting to think about is, how is it that you have all these different parts related so that it gives rise to this new whole object? Now, the thing that he's worried about is not words, it's not organisms. In the Republic, what he's interested in is, actually two things. It's partly organisms. He's worried about, not worried, he's interested in these different aspects of the human life. We have all these things that are like emotions, and we have these things that are reasons, and these are all different aspects of the human life. We have different desires, passions, thirst, hunger, fear. We have in like rational intentionality, like we might have beliefs about what's good for us to do, what's bad for us to do. All these things are different parts of our soul, he calls it, but yet somehow they all come together to form a single psychology, a single kind of a psychological ethos. And so what he's sort of wondering is, how is it that we have all these different parts of our psychological life coming together to have a single life, a single action? And which of these different parts of our lives are like the ruling parts? For some people, hunger might be like the most ruling part of them. So whenever you're slightly hungry, all the other aspects of your life can go out the window. You know how I should probably stay and get a little more work done, even though I'm a little hungry right now. But if you're someone who takes their passions, specifically like hunger, to be their ruling part, then anytime that you have this desire, that part of you is going to kick in, and it's going to like control your life. Your life is going to be controlled by this part of you, which is the passions. And so you might think all the other parts become slaves to the passions because that's the ruling part of you. So one of the things the Republic is about is it's about the constitution, or the composition of the human being. How do all these different parts come together in order to make a single human life? The other thing that he's interested in is, kind of going up a level, is how do all these different human beings come together to form a whole society? So he's interested in the human being as a whole in relation to the various, psychological parts that he has. Sometimes they're called psychological faculties, or different faculties of your soul. How do they all come together to make a single soul, a single life? But then he's also interested in, how does your life fit into the broader whole of society? So it's the case that when I make an action, or when I do an action, let's say, or I even deliberate or reflect on what I should do, even before I act, I think about what I should do. Those questions of those questions that I deliberate about are always going to be, or as he's going to say, they should be in relation to this broader whole that I'm a part of. So you could best example off the bat, before we get into like kind of this societal part of the Republic, think about like a team, like a baseball team or a football team, or anything like that. What a player should do at any given point in practice, or any given point in a game, is they should reflect on not just what's going to be good for me, but what's going to be good for this broader thing, this bigger thing that I'm a part of, namely the team. So if it turns out that you don't really like running stairs, it doesn't feel good to you, You might do it because it makes you as an individual athlete better. But it's also the case that perhaps the reason you want to be a better athlete is not just for your own purposes, for your own individual gain, but maybe you want to be a better athlete because it'll make the team as a whole better. And so there's this thing that you realize your training is at the service of. Your training isn't just at the service of you as an individual. It's at the service of this bigger reality that you are a part of. And so you could think of an analogy. Hearts and lungs are to human beings as human beings are to teams, or human beings are to society, right? An individual human being is like an organ of society. And what the Republic, Plato's Republic, what it's about is it's about that twofold kind of constitution relationship between the parts of an individual and the individual as a whole, and then society and the parts of society, the individuals. And so when you think about what's going to make me happy, how am I going to live a good life, you need to think about those two things. You need to think about what are parts of me and how do I order those parts? Like, how do I, properly control my hunger and all my other bodily desires? How do I keep all of that under wraps so it doesn't kind of control me and my life becomes a slave to these passions? But then also, you have to ask the question on the other side, which is, how does my life serve this bigger, broader reality? This is something that if you ever go on to become a parent, you realize this is like what the question of family life amounts to. How is it that I, as an individual, can be happy? Well, it's only going to be in relation to these other people that I'm living with. And so my happiness is actually something which is found in relation to other people. And so the Republic is about this look at the relation of parts to wholes through those two kind of levels, or those two contexts: society, or what's kind of more commonly known as the political, and then the ethical, which is sort of the individual man. The political is man as communal, and so that's what the Republic is going to be. And so an emphasis on one of those at the exclusion of the other is going to be an incomplete picture. So this goes back to what I said at the very beginning, which focusing on a part and forgetting the whole is to the detriment, right? You lose sight of what you're really talking about, what you're really looking about. And so this has really, think about the practical implications of this. If you think about what is going to make me happy, and you just focus on you, then you're automatically kind of losing sight of something that's necessary. Namely, you have to think about what you are a part of, or a member of, or what you are related to in this broader way. And so the Republic is going to be this attempt to make that call it this movement of transcendence from looking at the part to looking at the whole. So we'll be referring to the concept of transcendence. You could think of it as that, being able to see something in one way, like letters. You see just a bunch of letters on a page. Like right now I'm trying to teach my daughter to read. She can look at the page and just see a bunch of letters, but she's missing something, right? There's something important that she's missing, even though she sees all the letters. She hasn't transcended the letters to the word, right? So some type of transcendence or movement above letters. You got to move above letters to see this broader whole, the word. Right? If you wouldn't know how to read if all that you could do was identify letters. So like beginning with the Republic, if you just said, oh yeah, there's the letter I, and then there's a space, and then it's WENT, and there's another space. You're not reading because there's no content there. There's no meaning there. You have to transcend the letters to see them as a whole, and that's what we call the word. And so this is a very important theme of Plato. It's the notion of transcendence, which is to take the parts, to take the things that are lower, and to see them from above, or to see them on high, or to see them in a transcendent way. It's to kind of like elevate them, to elevate the parts into a whole. So that's what the Republic is attempting to do, and that's why at the very heart of the Republic, the most famous part of the Republic, probably the most famous part of Plato anywhere, is the allegory of the cave, which is this allegory of someone who's living in a cave and who's ignorant, and it's about their ascent or transcend from the cave out into the open, so that they can see more clearly. You see shadows in the cave. You then as you leave the cave, sight gets clearer and clearer as you sort of move up to the whole, and that's one of the themes throughout the whole of the Republic, is this idea of moving to a new, deeper way of seeing parts, so that they get all ordered, and they almost become a whole new reality. Just as letters become a whole new reality when you see them as words, the human life becomes a whole new reality when you see it as not just a whole of all these, competing emotions and desires, but the human life becomes a whole new reality when you see it embedded in a broader life, a societal life, or a familial life, or even for Christians, a divine life. Once you see the human life as part of, in some interesting sense, part of the life of God, the divine life. This happens, in Catholicism through the sacraments. We share in the divine life. Once the human life is seen as being part of or participating in this broader life, it takes on a whole new meaning, a whole new significance, and so that notion of participating in something, becoming a part of something, is the main concept of the Republic. So if there's like one thing that you take away this whole summer, is it's this notion that what the Republic is about is it's about seeing yourself as participating in something bigger, something more transcendent, something more elevated. Call it that. Just say more elevated than just you as an individual. And so as we go through the Republic, the things that you'll be wanting to look at is the ways in which Plato is pushing us to try to make that transition from seeing things in terms of parts to seeing things in terms of the whole. And then what we'll see is a bunch of characters who fail to do that, who think, oh no, happiness is just about what I can get when I can get it, whenever I want to get it. And what he's saying is there's something tragic about that, because if you only get what you want in this kind of individualistic way, you're actually like digging your own grave. You are the one that's preventing yourself from being happy, being fulfilled. So you become your own worst enemy. That's kind of the flip side of the Republic, is that you're often most of the human failures that we have are due to us, and this is just the nature of free will. Is that when we're unhappy, a good reason for that is because of ourselves. We either have false expectations, right? Most people who are bored, and they think they're so unhappy because they're so bored, they don't have anything to do. That's likely, their boredom is likely their own fault in many ways, because there's lots of things that perhaps could be done in the state of boredom that would lead you to not being bored. But it's your decision not to do those things, or not to see the stuff before you as interesting. Right. So that's one of the things to realize, is that our failures are often our fault too. So when things aren't going your way, I think what Plato's wanting us to do is to stop and reflect on what is it about us that's contributing to our own unhappiness, because that often is going to be a very key element to why we're unhappy. And if we can change that, or if it's that's within our control, then we're going to be able to be one step closer to being happiness, or to being happy. And one of the things that I think is at stake in all that is our ability to see reality in this transcendent way, which lets us, live a higher life. You might, just as words have a higher meaning than letters, living a social life has a higher meaning than living an individual life. It's kind of like your life extends beyond just the confines of your body when you realize that what you do, the choices you make, are really, it's kind of like the life of this broader community. Think about like a team, like the happiness of winning is not just like an individual happiness, but we always, when a team wins, we always say, oh, they won. Or if you're on a team and you won nationals or whatever, you say, oh, we did this, we won. And so it's something that you share in together. And part of what makes it so great is that it is something that's shared in, and you realize that it was only accomplished because it was done communally. It wasn't any one individual. It was a communal thing. And you realize, therefore, your life is bigger than yourself now, because you've united yourself to something broader than just an individual. Okay, so that kind of frames the Republic a little bit, and we'll be returning to those themes. Before we finish, I want to say just a brief word about Socrates and Plato and the format of the Republic. So I already mentioned that the Republic is a dialogue, and actually it's not exactly a dialogue as it is Socrates's reflection or recollection of a conversation that he had the day before. So the way that the Republic begins is, I went down to the Piraeus yesterday with Glaucon, the son of Ariston, to say a prayer to the goddess, and also because I wanted to see how they would manage the festival, yada yada. Okay, so it's Socrates telling us, the reader, I went down to the Piraeus yesterday, and here's what happened. And then he gives us this, incredible lengthy, like 300-page story. So this whole thing is actually a narration of Socrates to us, the reader, right? So even though it's written like, here's what the slave says. Polemarchus wants you to wait. And then a little later, you have Glaucon saying, all right, we'll wait. So it looks like it's this kind of back and forth dialogue. You should think of it as like, it's Socrates, sitting there, reporting this conversation that happened. Okay, and now this is significant for a couple of reasons. One of the main reasons that this is significant is it's sort of reminiscent, or not reminiscent, it's foretelling of the whole structure of the Republic. So the Republic, as we kind of already alluded to, is about this movement from parts to whole. But one of the things that we'll see is this structure, which is known as like an exitus reditus structure. It's a common phrase. That's a common phrase used in theology. What it basically means is like this leaving and coming back journey. So the Odyssey is a great, classic example of this. It's like a leaving, and then you are trying to return. You go out, and then you come back. And one of the things that you can think of in light of kind of a theology or a metaphysics of creation is what existence is it's God's like giving of himself, giving of his being, this great like outpouring. And what the point or the purpose of this outpouring is that it be reciprocated and then brought back to the Father. So this is also Trinitarian theology uses this example, the Father's outpouring of the Son, and then it's like reciprocated or returned back, and the union that's brought about between this going out and coming back is the Holy Spirit. So anyway, the point is that this structure, the way that the dialogue, the Republic is conducted, is it makes you understand that this is a recollection. This is an attempt of Socrates to recall something that has already happened. And when you recall something that's already happened, it almost becomes new again, right? So that it looks like, oh, you're just reporting what happened in the past. This is one of the great downfalls of our understanding of memory, is we think that it's just like rote repetition or reproduction. You're just reproducing exactly what happened before. But that's not the way that the ancient Greeks thought of memory or recollection. They thought of it more as like a sacramental, which is why in the Gospels and St. Paul you get this idea of the sacrament of the Eucharist of do this in memory of me. It's not just a memory in the sense of think about me when you do this, but it's to remember something is to make it new again. It's sort of different, but it's also the same, right? So what memory is it's the old made new, or the old made present again. It's still literally the same old, but it's still, or nevertheless, here now. And so what Plato's doing is he's making something that was past present, and so the kind of the drama of time is kind of at stake here. Is something that is in the past merely stuck in the past, or can it be brought to the present? And I think what Plato's trying to do is he's trying to say it can be brought to the present. Things that happened in the past can be, in some interesting way, made present. An action you've done in the past doesn't just stay in the past; it kind of lingers, and what you do in the future can have effects, interestingly enough, on that past action. Real quick example, then we'll go on. So if you think about, if you're playing music, you're playing like the piano, like an improv, piano piece, and you're playing, and then you hit a note that doesn't exactly sound right, but you keep going, and as you keep going, you can kind of correct that note because you can make it part of like a particular run or something, and then it becomes fitting. It actually starts to make sense as you continue. So what looked like it was a mistake can actually be redeemed given how you progress forward. And so that's one of the things that is going to be going on here. This notion of recollection as being able to take what was past, made it, have it being brought to the present, and that thereby kind of redeems it in a way. Okay, so I want to say a brief word about Plato and Socrates. They were both actual real people that lived in ancient Greece, in Athens. Socrates was older than Plato. Socrates never wrote anything, and so everything that we have about Socrates is through the writings of others. So most especially Plato. There's other people that wrote a little bit about Socrates, but Plato's like our main source for understanding Socrates. Socrates was born roughly around 469 BC, lived in Athens his whole life, and he dies in 399. He served in the military. Let's see. He was sort of reported for having been a pretty well-known public figure, despite his intentions. A couple dialogues of Plato, Socrates is said to have kind of wished to have lived a private life, but he kind of gets sucked into public renown, partly due to just how odd of a character he is. Let's see. So Plato was a student of Socrates, you could say. But by student, what I mean is he just spent much of his time with Socrates, with a group of other young men. They just, sat with Socrates, walked around with him while Socrates talked. They had conversations with him. So it was sort of an informal type of schooling. But that's the origin of the academic context. Is actually Plato starts one of the first schools, you could call it, in the West, the academy, and it was just this kind of informal school where people come and they dialogue, they have conversations, and the conversations consist in asking questions and answering, and then being willing to question the answers and kind of go back and forth in this question and answer type of way, all with good spirit in regards to no one is winning or losing. Everyone wins when people are honestly trying to understand. So it's not I'm trying to get this person to believe what I believe. That would not be philosophical. That would be what Plato refers to as sophistical. That's what the sophists do. They're not worried about understanding. They're just worried about trying to convince people of what they believe. Whereas what the philosopher is doing is they're trying to ask questions and understand, even to the point of being willing to say, I want to prove my own views wrong. I'm trying to prove myself wrong, as sort of a mark of how much they love the truth, right? They love the truth over their own, preconceived ideas, or theories or things like that. So sort of an interesting thing, but it's rooted in this type of dialogue. You have to have another person questioning you if you're going to practice philosophy, because you have to be examined. Someone has to examine you, kind of almost like you could think of it as like a doctor shining a light on the sick patient, trying to reveal all of the errors, all the mistakes in the patient. What philosophy is it's this dialogue where each contributor is shining a light on the other, and they shine the light on the other by asking questions that maybe are difficult questions that a lot of people wouldn't want, to have asked of them, because they know it would be hard to answer. But the idea is that the philosopher, is this person who wants to be examined because they want the truth over their own false opinions, and so they're trying to like uproot all of these false opinions. And so it's like the light is being shown on the other by these questions, and the dialogue is the way of kind of resolving, maybe not resolving, but the way of carrying out the examination, which is aimed at truth. Now, the thing is that Socrates was killed for doing this. He was executed by drinking hemlock, famous hemlock. It actually, I think, grows natively in Kansas, so you kind of have to be careful eating little white flowers. I think they look like Queen Anne's lace, if you know that flower. So don't eat any little white flowers in Kansas, because they're poisonous. But he drank hemlock and died, and that was in 399. And one of the reasons is because of the fact that he conducted this type of method. And why would this be a problem? Well, if those that were in power, those that were sort of politically strong, were being questioned, and they couldn't answer those questions, then their power, their authority is being removed from them, right? So if someone, it's like the emperor's new clothes, right? If no one questions the emperor, it seems like he has all this power. But once you start to question him and you realize he's just an average Joe like everyone else, that he doesn't know any better than I do. He doesn't know any better way to rule than I know how to rule. It looks like his authority gets undermined once his ignorance is manifested or revealed. And so Socrates was hated because he was kind of revealing the ignorance of all these people that had power. And obviously, if you have power, you don't want that to happen because you want to retain your power. And so they had to get rid of Socrates, and so he was executed. Okay, so all of this is within the context, or within kind of the aim of being able to see what's so special about Plato. So Plato picks up where Socrates leaves off. And what I mean by that is Socrates carries on this dialogue in flesh and blood with people. And that's the philosophical spirit, like this conversation of being willing to ask questions and being willing to be asked questions by other people, and not fearing, saying, "Oh, I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question. I don't know the answer." Or even you come to the realization, "Oh yeah, I'm wrong about that. That's not the right answer," and having to correct yourself. So Socrates did that in flesh and blood. What Plato does is Plato writes dialogues. Plato does that in person too, but he's most well known for writing these dialogues. And what's so special about the dialogues is they're conversations. And what he wants you to get out of reading these conversations is that you become a participant in the conversation itself. So it's not simply that you're this outside, bystander that's just passively reading these questions. So when Socrates asks a question of Glaucon, it's not like you as a reader just say, "Oh, I'm glad he didn't ask me that question because I don't know what the hell I would have said." Instead, what's going on is when Socrates asks Glaucon this question, in the Republic, the reader who's listening, so to speak, or reading to this conversation, they start to ask themselves that question. And so it looks like what Plato's dialogues allow for is they allow for the reader to enter into a dialogue even if there is no flesh and blood person before them. So the written dialogue kind of reincarnates Socrates, so that Socrates now questions the reader through the reader's attentiveness to the conversation that's happening in the dialogue. So it's a really beautiful kind of stylistic thing that's happening here, that the reader gets sucked into the dialogue so that they become a participant. And so it's never the case that you should say, these are questions that Socrates is asking of Polemarchus, or Socrates is asking of Adeimantus, or anything like that. You should always say, these are questions that are being asked of me, the reader of the dialogue. And to do that is to read philosophically. And all of Plato's dialogues are things that are intended to be read philosophically. Just as a reader of like sacred scripture needs to read everything spiritually, right? So it's not like you read it merely just for the historical sort of insight that you might get, or the legal literary insight you might get from the scriptures. It's always, this is something that's not just being reported, but it's something that's being spoken to me, the reader. And so it's always personal, right? So reading is always a personal activity. And so what what Plato is doing in writing the dialogues is he's trying to call you, the reader, into dialogue, into conversation with the text, right? So it's not just that you're reading about a dialogue between these characters on the page, but rather you yourself are dialoguing with the text. And so some of the times you'll come across an answer that one of the members of the conversation give to one of Socrates' questions, like, oh, what do you think justice is? And the answer is so bad that you think, no, you shouldn't say that. That type of reaction is the reaction that that Plato wants the reader to have. He wants the reader to get involved in the dialogue, in the conversation, so that you kind of chime in as you're reading the dialogue. That can only happen if you're attentive, if you're reading it carefully and earnestly and personally. Just as when you're reading scripture, if you read it sort of in a disinterested way, you'll probably fall asleep and you'll probably think it's the most boring thing ever. But there's other people that can read scripture if you read it attentively, and you read it and you try to question it, and you try to think of it in ways that sort of speak to you. It becomes a whole new type of book. It becomes almost like a living conversation. That type of thing is also what Plato wants the reader to have in reading his dialogues. So keep that in mind as you read the Republic. Don't just think about what they're saying. Also think about what you would say to this, and why did he say this in light of the fact that I'm reading it. So that's always important to keep in mind. Last thing, and then we'll call it good, and then we'll get into book one next time. This is just sort of set up for the Republic. But the Republic is this conversation, right, between all these characters, and it's something that has a content. There's stuff that's said, and then there's also a drama to it, meaning that there's a setting, right? So what's happening is there's a setting to the Republic. Socrates goes down to the Piraeus, right, with Glaucon, and then he tries to leave. He tries to leave the Piraeus, but he gets stuck. And the reason he gets stuck is because these other people force him to stay. And then you get this discussion about, will you let us go? And they say, no, we won't let you go unless you prove stronger. And they say, well, and they go back and forth about, who would be stronger and what would count as strength. And they're kind of toying with the idea, or playing with the idea of holding Socrates captive here because they want something out of Socrates. So right off the bat, what you get is this this dramatic element of the dialogue. The setting of the scene is such that Socrates makes this descent. He tries to ascend, but he can't, because people, the majority, with force, the majority with what they regard as power, they're holding Socrates back. They're basically enslaving him, and he's trying to leave. He's trying to go back home to Athens, and now that is like the dramatic telling of the thesis of the Republic, right? So as we said earlier, the Republic thesis can be seen as this: how do you make the ascent from the lower to the higher, the lower view to the higher view, the parts to the whole? And what you get is Socrates in the drama. Socrates is being held at the lower. How does he return to the higher, which is like quite literally the higher city, the city that's at higher elevation, the Athens? How does he make that ascent? What's holding him back? So all of these dramatic, the dramatic setting is philosophically important and interesting in understanding what the Republic is about. So when you read this, you should read it not just as a work of philosophy, but as a work of literature. It's quite a beautiful, beautifully written work. There's also a lot of humor in it. So a lot of the humor is kind of subtle and dry, and there's a lot of innuendos because Socrates is trying to be funny, but he doesn't want to like offend, and so there's a lot of subtleties, and so you kind of have to, have an attentive eye, just as when you're listening to a conversation. You might completely miss a joke because you don't get the subtlety or the play on words that's being made. That happens throughout. So the Republic is kind of a masterwork in many ways. It's philosophically interesting. It's also just a great read. So I highly recommend that you do spend the time with it. I know it'd be easy to just skim the book, but if there's like one thing you do this summer, just carefully read through the Republic. I can almost guarantee that there's going to be if you do read it, every page of it, by the end of the class, I can almost guarantee that there'll be some people that'll email me saying, Dr. Jager, I really don't think you're that great of a teacher. I don't really like you, but the Republic was really wonderful. I'm really glad I read it. You made it confusing, but the Republic was like the highlight of the semester. Hopefully I can help you a little bit along the way, but the text itself, I know for some of you, if you do read it, it will be one of your favorite books that you read in college. I can almost guarantee you of that. But the only way to find that out is if you actually read it. It's one of the most popular books ever written in the Western world. And so it'll make you just seem a lot smarter. Actually, it will make you actually smarter, but it'll make you sort of impressive if you can have a conversation with people about the Republic. The Republic is a book that's been significant for politics, psychology, obviously philosophy, sociology, theology. A colleague of mine in the theology department is actually going to be teaching the Republic in his theology of the church class, because the Republic is like the background for a lot of ecclesiology, theology of the church. How do you, the body of Christ is this, there's one body but many members, many parts. How do they all, come to form a single body? That's, like we said earlier, that's the that's the Republic for you, right? That's exactly what you're getting in the Republic. So it's really, I think, for me, outside of the Bible, it's probably the most important book to read, up there with the Brothers Karamazov. If you know anything about me, you'll know that book's up there too. So, but anyway, I hope you have some motivation and some understanding approaching this text, and we'll get into the meat of it next time. All right.